Oh, no, 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 no. Quakers in Criminal Justice. And if you want to have a look at what we're at, do have a look at the website. It's simply www.qicj.org. And what you'll see under conferences is that we now have information about our 2025 conference, which is Amadown outside Bath. And so we've got a note taker. We are settled with recording. So I think this is the time for me to welcome everybody to the second of our 3 Business Week 24 sessions. We had a look at the good yesterday. I'm afraid today it's going to be the bad. And to me, the twin long-term issues of the bad are overcrowding and underfunding, which are a very bad combination. So we have these ever-increasing sentences. We have the recalls, which they don't seem to have very much in the rest of Europe, but we absolutely love recalls in the United Kingdom. And of course, we have people on remand because the courts are so extremely clogged up. And the underfunding, as we'll hear from Liz, has a terrible impact on maintenance of buildings that were squalor and just the unpleasantness of the environment. And of course, this leads to a bad working environment. So we see understaffing, both in terms of recruitment and retention. And so we get so many prisoners who are locked up for a lot of their time, which makes rehabilitation really quite difficult. And of course, another thing that affects rehabilitation is if you're suddenly out earlier than expected. So the resettlement arrangements are not in place with this early release. So it'll be great to hear from somebody who's really got a grip on what she saw as so bad that she had to break the rules that bind you as a chaplain because it was impossible to work inside the system. So what I suggest is that we will have a few moments of silence now. Liz will start when she's ready to speak. And then she's not going to speak for too long because she wants to give you a chance to make comments or ask questions, and then we can learn from each other. Thank you, friends.
I've been given the task of the bad in the good, the bad, and the ugly. And Wandsworth Prison does exactly, or did exactly, fit the description of the bad. So what does a bad prison look like? Wandsworth is 2 prisons in 1 campus. It was built as a man's prison and a women's prison, but has been running since the 1920s as 2 men's prisons. But it's 2 big, old-fashioned stars with a lantern construction and visibility down the wings. It runs. When I left it, it ran to 1,600 men. There is no modern cells, no modern accommodation of any sort. There are porter cabins in the yards, which are used as classrooms, but really there's not much in the way of spare land because it's an inner city site. So we've got these 2 Victorian prisons, which were built before electricity, before running water, before sewage. So modern systems have been pushed through the walls in big runs so that the heating pipes, the sewage pipes, the electricity runs on boxed in piping and through the cells, giving enormous rat runs for vermin. Also, our sewers were not built for 1,600 people to flush the lavatory 3 times a day. They weren't built for automatic washing machines running. So what we end up with is a lot of vermin, sewage that backs up and comes up through the wands. People who can leave the prison. I met a prisoner last week who said he'd been in Wandsworth for about 3 months and he'd never had a hot shower. In fact, he laughed and said one day he'd had a hot shower. It was too hot, he couldn't get under it. But we struggle. We struggle with hot water. We struggle with water at all sometimes. We struggle with sewage, and we struggle with vermin. Like a lot of the other old buildings, we have roof lights to give light into the landings and the wings, and they either won't open or they won't close, so that in the latest batch of flash flooding, we had our wands completely flooded, and water pouring through from the roofs. We are absolutely at maximum capacity. So there is no communal space. I suspect my audience knows only too well what a prison is like in Britain, but many of the people I speak to think prisoners eat in dining rooms or have rooms where you could watch a film or have a discussion group. We don't even have enough rooms where a man can talk in private to a chaplain or an officer. On many wings, I have talked to people about the death of a relative and have said, you sit on the 3-legged chair, I'll sit on the abandoned washing machine. It's squalid at the moment. And because it's squalid and we don't have enough staff, men are on a 23-hour lockdown. And I would argue as Quaker that makes people very aggressive when they come out and badly behaved when they get out. And that is a disincentive to staff. Our staff are not experienced. They're not recruited by our governor. They're recruited on online systems and then allocated to Wandsworth. They're often very young, really rather unsuitable, and they don't stay long. So we have a real staffing crisis where sometimes only 40% of the staff turn up on any one day. I mean, that is 40% of the scheduled staff. So what we end up with is an embattled and embittered staff who are frequently rude. There are very, very good staff working in Wandsworth, but there are also some very strange attitudes going on. So when I'm describing the bad, I would describe Wandsworth as the bad. I'm not alone in this. You only have to look at the Wandsworth IMB report, the Wandsworth Chief Inspector's report, both of which have come out in the last 6 months, and both of which are quite shocking. I mean, the IMB report has photographs of dead rats. It has photographs of our showers, where I don't think anybody sane would ever want to take their clothes off and walk into our showers. It can be quite scary. I left being a chaplain, a Quaker chaplain, in November 2023. My keys were withdrawn because I had given small amounts of money to 6 men. I spoke about the poor conditions in Wandsworth publicly And I was at that point very, very tired and humiliated. I had not done the best thing by Quakers, by myself, and everything seemed to have been pulled away. I was much supported by other Quakers, and there was an enormous movement round me to form a group, which we have formed, called the Wandsworth Prison Improvement Campaign. The Wandsworth Prison Improvement Campaign is about 50-50 Quakers and others. And most of us are retired from posh jobs. And it has been an amazing experience. We have worked very hard to get the plight of Wandsworth Prison into the public domain, to push for improvement in the prison. We had meetings and decided on 5 asks. And our asks are, we've kept with our 5 asks, and they are that all prisoners get their medication on time and attend all external hospital appointments, that there is a sustained plan to deal with rats, pigeons, and other vermin, and a daily cleaning regime, that there are effective contracts put in place for the repair and maintenance of the boilers, the hot water system, and the sewage, that the laundry systems are explored such that there is sufficient laundry and changes of clothes and underwear and access to showers, and that there is easy access to books. We worked on our five aims to focus down on the needs of Wandsworth. We weren't interested in becoming what you might call prison reformers. We were interested in getting cleanliness and decency into our prison, because other people were doing prison reform, and we had a place that was our neighbour that's sheer lack of decency was breaking people. So we had our 5 asks. We have no constitution and we're not a charity. So we beg for money, but we've always been quite well supplied with money. And we have the bank account of a club, and one of us keeps an account of it. Since starting, we've been off to see the Howard League, the Society for Penal Reform. We've done interviews on Channel 4 News. We've seen any journalist who would see us. And we've tried hard to meet men out of the prison and the families of people visiting, so that we keep up-to-date information about what's going on. Always holding to our 5 asks, which are really not political. Initially, the prison closed ranks and wouldn't respond to emails. The IMB wouldn't speak to us. There was radio silence from the prison. We had a public meeting in a local church, and we had a public meeting with 350 people who came. We had the most amazing speakers. Lord Ponsonby came to speak. Pia Singer from the Prison Reform Trust came to speak. We had ex-prisoners who came to speak. It definitely stirred up a great deal of local interest about the conditions within our neighbourhood prison. What we've done since is that we have our own website. We have a Twitter where we post our letters and what has been said to us. And we have a Facebook group, which is for families. It's an invitation-only Facebook group. You apply to join it, and we have invigilators who take in family members and ex-prisoners and anybody that can claim a genuine interest in the prison. And there we get reports of whether A wing has got water, whether C wing has lost its food. We get information from inside. The other thing we've started to do in the year is that we attend the coroner's inquests of every man that dies in Wandsworth Prison. It's quite a time-consuming thing, because an inquest can take 3 weeks, but one of us makes sure that we always go, because we have learnt an enormous amount about the failures of our prison from those inquests. And we put it on the website and we post about it. We have a leaflet which is about clothing and what clothing you can take in for a man in the prison, because our prison doesn't give out adequate information. And we have little cards, which I'm going to try and hold up. That's one of our little cards, which gives our website, our Twitter, all our contact details, and then says on the other side, got a friend or relative in Wandsworth Prison, fed up with the conditions in Wandsworth Prison, think the way men are treated makes everything worse, need help in complaining, email or tweet to us. And we give those cards out to the visits queue. And one of the things that our mums, the mums of prisoners that have worked with us, do is stand giving out cards to other mums and other family members. And that's worked extremely well to get information from the inside out about what the conditions are like in Wandsworth. In the last 3 months, we've had a new governor at Wandsworth, and that has brought considerable hope. And the new governor approached us, and we've been out to lunch with the governor. I am now doing a 3-weekly report to the governor of all the shortcomings that are being reported to us. And where he can, he's coming back to me. We're trying to open up again to the IMB to say, your responsibility goes beyond doing a once-a-year report. You are the eyes and ears of the community. Please feed back to us.
Liz, can I just interrupt a moment?
Yes.
I think some people on this Zoom might not know what the IMB is. Would you just explain?
Sorry, it's the Independent Monitoring Board. In history, they were the Board of Visitors, and they are volunteers who work in the prison. They go around the prison, they talk to men, they can receive complaints, they talk to the governor, and once a year they will write a report on the condition of each prison that the board works in. They're generally they're very good. They are the eyes and ears of people that are not paid to be in the community, people not paid to be in the prison. And they do this once-a-year report. Like the Chief Inspector's reports, it goes online. It's disgusting. It doesn't say a good thing about Wandsworth. It goes online and nobody reads it. So we want the IMB to talk to us. we want to start airing their concerns as well as we go along. And again, we're getting information from the inquests, and it's very clear that all the inquests from Wandsworth are now being done by the same coroner and the same coroner's team, and that, reading between the lines, he is as disgusted by what's going on as we are, and he wants things done. And it's kind to us, you know. It says, come to the front and sit at the desk, you know, take notes. So this morning we've had a meeting where we're discussing our strategy for the next year to keep going, to keep nagging, because whilst we have a new governor, and I am very confident he wants change, a big prison is a very, very big ship to turn round. Wandsworth is in very poor state physically. The buildings are disgusting, and the attitudes of staff are entrenched. So whilst I'm optimistic about the new governor, I wouldn't want his job. So that's my bad prison, with some hope with the new governor, and some hope that a group of noisy, kindly people are working round it, trying to throw light on it. And that I can't think of anything else to do. Anybody got any ideas as to how to get change?
Could you mention the prisons minister? I think you said that maybe James Timpson had a good contact with him. We'd like to hear about that.
Yes, on Tuesday I was a speaker at a conference where he was going to be a speaker. In fact, he didn't. But it will be reported back to him. The other people there were one of the ex-chief inspectors of prisons, the current chief inspector of probation, and a commissioner of domestic abuse, and lots of the Metropolitan Police. So we're trying to get as high a profile as we can, to not let the powers that be off the hook. There is no money for prisons. I think probably everybody on this call knows that we need fewer men in our prisons. We need more officers and better quality officers in our prisons. And we need money thrown at the infrastructure if we're to continue to use those old buildings. And how one explains to ministers that prisons should stand equal with education for budget, I don't know. Because I know as well as you do that all the departments are short of money. But I haven't seen a man leave Wandsworth better than he was when he went in. I have seen men leave broken. And you know, we take so many men who are mentally ill. And nobody's health is improved by filth. Nobody's health is improved by not washing, by not having enough clothing. and those are the issues. The big and you know, I've never worked anywhere but Wandsworth, but I know perfectly well. I think that all the big remand prisons are in exactly the same shape. When I spoke in public on Tuesday and said that I had been a prison chaplain who had stolen pants from consignments coming into the prison so that my wing should have pants, because I wanted to move them up into the wings of men that were living on £3 a week. There was nothing, nobody in the room said, well, you should have put in more orders for more pants. Everybody acknowledged that there was an enormous shortage of ordinary clothing, bedding, normal things. And now I've knocked you into silence. Can anybody think of a question?
Liz, is Wandsworth on urgent notification?
Yes.
Because this is the equivalent of special measures in school. There are 4 prisons altogether on urgent notification. So that should mean that the Ministry of Justice has a closer oversight of the prison. But I assume you find that's not making any difference.
It means we have got a lot of support, and I'm old, and one of the things I dislike about the modern world is when you go on to things like urgent notification, you have to respond in 28 days with a plan, and you get a wonderful plan on the internet with all sorts of jobs on it and who's in charge of that job. In fact, all the jobs were put into the charge of the governor. And then there are various helps that you'll be offered, which are teams that are offered for 28 days, teams that are offered for 3 months, people that are offered for 6 months. It's a very, very big ship. It will take a lot of money and a lot of effort, more than 6 months to turn it. In the plans included renovating the showers by the summer of 2029. Now, this is a prison where men can't get a wash. And to me, 2029 is, I don't know whether I'll be alive then. We're talking a long time away. There's, if in any of our homes the shower ceased, we would be incandescent with rage if we couldn't get a plumber inside 6 months, not 2029.
Right. Could I open it up to anyone who would like to make a comment or ask a question? Sarah and I have got this on 2 screens, so please be patient as we move back and forth. So either a little yellow hand or a real hand waving. We'll accept either. Celia, could you unmute Celia, please, Sarah?
First, I'd like to say a big thank you to Liz and what she's done. And it couldn't have been easy. And I have heard Liz at the QICJ conference, and you're impressive, and it's amazing what you've done. But I did note that you very much emphasised that this was one thing you were doing, a neighbourhood prison, that you were not a campaigning group. And I understand that totally, and others are doing that work. But I do feel you're a template. Your whole group is a role model, yes. and it could be used And I wondered if you you thought about that. The other, sorry to do two, is that today they announced that magistrates' courts were going to deal with a lot more of the remand prisoners to try and get remand prisoners through the system much quicker. What percentage of Wandsworth prisoners are on remand, do you know, and how does that reflect? So two questions in one, really.
Right. I think of at the moment, Wandsworth's got 1,400 men in it because they have made a big effort to empty it in order to try and renovate something. I think about 800 are remand and stuck there. So I've always argued that we wanted to move faster on remand. At the conference, somebody got up, somebody important and who knew their statistics, said that actually if we got the court speeded up so that they were moving faster, we would actually end up with more men in prison, not less. And of course, the prison service is at capacity. I mean, there is hardly a bed to be had at the inn. So I don't know how I feel about remand. Where I would argue that we really need to do something is on recall. We also have a lot of men on recall, where they're recalled for they're recalled for infringement of their license. So they've gone somewhere they shouldn't go, or they're late to probation. Minor offences, actually. They haven't stolen anything or attacked anybody. They've fudged up the conditions of their license. Apparently, recall used to be governed that you couldn't be recalled by your probation officer. They had to go to a magistrate for a recall. And now a probation officer can recall you. And that many of the probation officers are young, have got enormous caseloads, and are terrified of not recalling somebody who then gets themselves into trouble. So they will recall almost automatically. And we've got a large number of men who are recalled for really very minor offences. I mean, I could argue that because when I look back on my working life, and when I see men coming out now, I see men who are going out on licence. They're skipping into the street wearing a t-shirt and shorts and flip-flops because they haven't any clothes. They're homeless, and nobody's ever given them the terms of their licence. No, nobody has sat with them and said, you are out on licence. These are the terms of your licence. This is what you must and mustn't do. If they've got the terms of their licence, it's on a scrumpled piece of paper in a pocket, and they don't read very well. And then they're late going back into probation, and will say, well, the buses have stopped. And of course, in London, that's true. And then they're recalled. So the system's broken.
Right, anybody else like to throw in a comment? Or are we so completely dumbfounded by this that we're rendered speechless?
Yes, sorry.
Leslie Chandler.
Can you say anything positive about Wandsworth? Or positive about anything that's been forthcoming from the 5 asks that you mentioned?
There is work going on to get men their meds and to get them to hospital appointments and to get the medical team working with now, I'll use the word the ACTS team. If you are suicidal or vulnerable or in a dangerous condition in prison, you're put on an ACT. It's a file, it's kept with you, and you have to be reviewed regularly, and you ought to be reviewed by a multidisciplinary team. There's a lot of emphasis being put on getting those acts properly reviewed, getting meaningful conversations going with prisoners on an act. The governor's trying very hard. When you are running a shop and only 40% of the shop assistants turn up to work, asking the 14 shop assistants to have meaningful conversations with the customers and to do everything that a staff of 100% should do is impossible. And you hear me criticizing that staff, but in my heart, I understand well why they can't and don't, and why they get bad-tempered and nasty. Because 40 people can't do the job of 100.
Can I ask you, Liz, about... Oh, sorry, are you still on that point?
I was going to just talk about deaths in custody. And what we see is an area where men are suicidal. They're known to be suicidal, and they go on an act. And at the act review, somebody will say, oh, well, you've got to be looked at every hour or every 20 minutes. Some officer has got to have to see you. And that discussion as to how suicidal you are, whether you need more mental health support, whether there's anything that anybody can do that will help you, that's the multidisciplinary team. In the inquests, we see sometimes that the multidisciplinary team, when you look at it and when the coroner asks for those men to come forward, that it was only 2 officers. It wasn't a multidisciplinary team. And then it turns out that one officer can't remember the name of the other one. In fact, one suspects it was only one officer. You get men on an act where they're supposed to have a meaningful conversation with officers. And you'll see written reports where officers went to see them at 12, 12:20, 12:40, 1 o'clock, 1:20, 1:40, 2 o'clock, 2:20, 2:40, 3 o'clock. And that's the written record. Nothing happens to time in a prison. Do you know when you go to the lavatory in the motorway service station, and behind the door, there's a thing that says, how often was this lavatory cleaned? And you see 1 o'clock, 1:20, 1:40, 2 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 2:20, 2:40, 3. And the names slightly slide down the page where the thing was all filled in at the same time. That's what you see on act reviews, where actually officers haven't had the time to go and see what's happened to a suicidal man. and you'll have a line that says lying on left side, lying on right side, watching the television. And then subsequently it appears he was dead. We haven't the staff to do what's required, to have meaningful conversations. And we have a culture where officers can write on records things that aren't quite correct. Notice my Quakerly wording. And other officers don't report them. And that's not right.
I was just going to ask about education. With the staff shortages, obviously people aren't going to get escorted to education.
Yes.
And when you say people are banged up 23 hours a day, does that mean education is closed down altogether?
There's some English as a foreign language going on, but often the teachers will report that whilst they were expecting a class of 12, only 2 people arrived because the officers didn't get people out. I mean, we have 1,600 men in Wandsworth and we have 2 libraries. On a parliamentary question, we got the figure of 100 men being taken to the library a week. And the libraries, this is 2 libraries, lending 94 books a week on average. Now that's 1,600 men who can each borrow 5 books, and the prison lent out 94 books on average a week. Nobody is getting to our libraries. I mean, funnily enough, the photographs in the inspector's report show absolutely a beautiful library. And all I can say is you have a beautiful library if you have no customers, because it's clean. And the books remain on the shelves and they look lovely.
Catherine,
but we don't have.
Sorry, Catherine Willis-Bighouse had a question.
Thank you for your exposition. I was just wondering if you could say a bit about the training of prison officers and who does it.
The prison service, there's a little college next to our prison, a prison officers training college. And a prison officers training, I think, takes 2 months at the moment, except the prison officers support officers, the support workers, like policemen have support officers. There are support prison officers, and they get 2 weeks training. One of the inquests we went to concerned a man who died on our A wing at night, and our A wing is enormous. It's about 250 men, and there was one officer on duty at night, and he was a support officer, so he had had 2 weeks training. He'd had no first aid training, and he found he saw through the door a pair of hanging legs. He was too frightened to go in. He was too frightened to remember the call sign that he should give. So he simply shouted for help. It's a big prison. And eventually somebody came to him. It was said that it took 20 seconds to get to him. I don't believe that for a minute. And he got help. But the fact that somebody with 2 weeks training and no first aid training was left in charge of 250 men at nights in the prison. And these are 250 men where a third of them are very seriously mentally ill. I would say 50% of them have been heavily addicted to something. And a large number of them are over 40. You know, if you were to risk a system, you'd want to weep for the responsibility of it. Our
Sorry,
officers
I see somebody's told me that Julia has her hand up. I'm afraid the hand has disappeared off the top of my screen.
Yes,
And
Julia's been waiting for a while.
and I think Sue Bennett, you had a question. So could we have first Julia and then Sue, please?
Thank you so much. This is all so interesting and so, well, so even more demoralising.
definitely the bad, isn't it? It's definitely the bad.
It's worse than bad. It's just appalling, and my hearts go out so much to everybody. So I have two rather separate questions, if I'm allowed to. The first is, I wouldn't mind knowing a bit more about the prison's minister, Mr. Timpson, who I had such hopes of, but one hears so little of him. The second one, completely different, if I'm allowed to, is what about the listeners in the prison? I understand you can train to be a listener.
Yes, yes, you can. Mr. Timpson, I have great hopes for him. I think it's early days. We have no budget. You know, we don't know who's going to get what money. At least he's a minister who knows what it's like to be in a prison. He's not somebody that thinks it's like a bad comprehensive school. So we just have to wait and see. I don't know. He has visited Wandsworth. The great joy of that, we laughed because we got a message from mums that some cleaners had been out on H-wing over the weekend. They'd been taken out of their cells on a Saturday and a Sunday. It's very rare for men to come out for work on a Saturday and a Sunday, taken out of their cells Saturday and Sunday to clean. And they'd cleaned the 1s and the 2s. They themselves lived on the 3s. So they'd said to officers, can we go on cleaning up on the 3s? And the officers said, oh, no, we never take visitors up there. So it was known that we were going to have visitors. And then on the Wednesday, it was the day I met the governor, and he said, oh, on Monday, Lord Timpson and Lord Ponsonby had been in. And we were laughing and saying, yes, we know, you cleaned the 1s and the 2s, which is where you walk your visitors. But you didn't clean the 3s, where the cleaners live. So at least they've been to see. Even and a bit like Princess Anne, they must know the smell of cleaning fluid and paint and realise that they get shown a picture. Now, your second question was the listeners.
That's right.
Yes, the Samaritans work well in the prison. They go in, they train, and we have a lot of men who are trained as listeners. There's two problems to any remand prison, and Wandsworth, because it's a remand prison and there's an enormous churn. You train a man as a listener, he goes to court, he gets sentenced, and then he gets moved to somewhere else. So you lose your listeners all the time.
Can he still listen in the
Yes, in another prison.
Yeah.
But if you want listeners in Wandsworth, you have to keep pumping them in training them. And the other thing is you need officers to let out your listeners so that they can listen. And we often don't let out our listeners to listen because we haven't the officers to let people out, especially at night when the whole thing's locked down. The other thing that's noticeable, and I mean, if you haven't been in a prison,
Been for a while.
the officers don't unlock, especially at night. So if a listener is unlocked, the conversation is held through the door jamb. You know, you're not talking about two human beings going into a private space and having an intimate conversation. You're talking about two people sharing a cell as big as as the little box room in most semi-detached houses. Two people are sharing it, and one is standing by the door and talking his most intimate problems through the door jamb to another man who's on the other side listening. And the rest of the wing are bored to bits by everything and wouldn't mind listening in as well. Because what's more interesting than the problems page of a magazine? So it isn't quite the Samaritan service as you and I might get it.
Yeah, it's got worse recently then, because I've read Chris Atkins' book, and he says he can, as a listener, he can get out any time of day or night to help.
He's a pre-COVID prisoner.
Right.
I know, Chris. He's pre-COVID, and after COVID, we've never come out of the 23-hour lockdowns.
See.
Oh.
Okay, can we unmute Sue Bennett, please?
Oh, hello. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you so much, Liz, for what you've been doing. I'm a Quaker in Newcastle meeting in the Northeast. My son has been in Wandsworth, was in Wandsworth on remand for 3 weeks last year for non-violent direct action with Just Stop Oil. And this has just been even worse than I thought it was. When he arrived there, he couldn't believe how he could actually exist in such a tiny space with another person. And of course, these cells were designed for one person by the Victorians and are now all occupied by two. One of the observations I'd like to say is that the choir that visits was absolutely wonderful. I think my son was doubtful about going, but he was persuaded to go, and it was absolutely inspirational. Another observation that he had is that he's about late 40s, is my son. He observed that the younger men were less able to cope when they first got there because they hadn't got the maturity to know how to deal with their frustration. And of course, that ends up in aggression and possibly self-harm. That's all I wanted to say, really. I found it really, really terrible listening to this. I'm frightened that he may end up back in there at any moment. And I desperately hope that we can make things better, not just in Wandsworth, but in the whole prison system. Thank you.
Would you ask him if he'd like to contact me? Because I'd like his account of what happened, and because there's when you're talking to ministers and you're like me, and you sound as if you're over egging your pudding all the time. It is incredibly useful to have eyewitness accounts.
Yeah, certainly.
And that, as you come on the screen and say your son was there, and my heart goes out and thinks, oh, is she going to say, and he had a very nice time and he liked the food. And I know it's not going to happen because I know how dire it is. But equally, it's really useful to have first-hand accounts.
Yeah,
and
can
also
I get
they
your
reveal shocking. Yes.
Can I get your details
at the end? Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, certainly, Liz.
because it's things like talking through a door jamb and the lack of privacy. The fact that two men in a cell are in, if you imagine most British semi-detached houses, at the top of the stairs is a little box room. That little box room has got 2 bunks in it, a sink and a lavatory, and a little counter. And that is it. And 2 of you are going to be in there for 23 hours, 23 hours, 23 hours, 23 hours, and you are going to go to the lavatory in front of one another. And the lavatory is right next to the head, sometimes the foot, of the bunk beds. The top bunk has no steps. So you have to climb to the top bunk. And sometimes in the prison, the younger men are the alphas because they're violent. So the older men get left to the top bunk. The older men like to go to the loo in the night.
Yeah.
And I'm a woman and I laugh because it isn't, you have men over 40 climbing with no ladder down, and rows developing about he put his foot in my face. And what does he want to keep going to the loo for in the night? And you think, oh, actually, that's just his age. It's miserable. It's miserable.
So if you contact me, I can put you in touch
Yeah.
because you've got my email. I've got Liz's email. Right, we're just about out of time. So let me just check if there's anybody else who's desperate to say something. And remind you that
There is Anne. I don't know.
is there somebody with a hand up that I can't see? I can't see the top row, unfortunately.
Anne L/S.
Oh, Anne Ellis. Are you wanting to speak? Yes, can we unmute Anne LS? She's on my second page.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I wanted to say that I hear of a friend, I heard from a friend about Amy Pritchard, who was one of the Just Stop Oil protesters who was given a much longer sentence than expected and served 2 months out of 12 being sent away for overcrowding. What I've been told, so this is hearsay, is that the food is so bad that her hair started falling out. But that it might not show as much with other prisoners because she is somebody who has kept to an organic diet for many years, and so the change of diet was quite a shock to her. Even though one of the other inmates helping in the visitors area was sort of sneaking things to her because she had been so helpful to other prisoners, helping them with letter writing and whatever else. And also that she's been recalled to prison, and the prison service is saying that she wasn't where she should have been for a tag to be fitted, but that the family is saying that she was with them all that evening as she should have been, and they can't understand, they can't have knocked at the right door. So it's hearsay, but I can pass on my contact name if that would be useful.
If anybody wants to go, just go. I can rabbit on about the food forever. The prison budget for feeding somebody for 24 hours, the court is given a budget, I think at the moment, of £3.08. and that is for everything, their tea bags, their tea, their breakfast, their lunch, their tea. Now, I don't know whether anybody here can feed a grown human being for £3.08 for everything, but it's a press. It very much depends if you are a poor man with no family or a rich man with a family. If you are poor and nobody sends money into the prison, you can't buy extra food. So you live on the food of the £3. And it's very hard to eat. One of the mums recently, as a Sikh woman, said that her son was a vegetarian and that the vegetarian dinner was yellow rice and white rice, and that she'd been begging him to eat meat, to go for the meat options, because she couldn't envisage him surviving on yellow rice and white rice. I'm sure it's balanced. And I am so old that my parents came through the war on 4 ounces of butter a week, an egg. You don't die. But it's not very good for you, and you certainly don't blossom. I mean, I laugh at the idea of the Just Stop Oil campaigners, because yes, they will have been eating organic vegetables and beautiful food, and then they're suddenly faced with this carbohydrate rubbish. And it's probably a terrible shock. How ordinary men with money from families manage is that they buy food on the canteen and they steal a second kettle and they cook a bit for themselves. They put their prison dinner into the kettle and they add tins of tuna, bits of spice, and they make curries, and they have bags of Uncle Ben's rice or noodles, and they supplement it. But you need a family outside to send you money in. If you haven't got that and you're living on £3, you start. What happens is they start to do little chores for other prisoners to earn little bits of food, particularly mayonnaise, tomato ketchup, brown sauce, which you can liberally spread over a dinner to make it wetter and more edible. You know, eating plain rice is hard. Spreading it with tomato ketchup makes it easier. We're not talking sophistication here. We're talking miserable.
Yes, I was told that she and probably other Just Stop Oil campaigners have lots of friends who bring in nice food or so forth, and that is shared out, and that is why one reason why she was so popular.
Yes, she's in a women's prison, and they can probably get more food and have probably a little bit more access to cooking. In a remand prison, you can just buy food. No, but you can't get food in through the visit system, and you live. Tins of tuna are the best thing. I mean, at the start of COVID, I can remember thinking, do I keep coming in or do I stay out? And I remember looking out over a wing and thinking, how many portions of fruit and vegetables have these people had in the last week? And my friend at the side of me said to me, well, are we going to count tomato crisps? Are we going to count crisps and tomato ketchup? Because that would give them all 2. And I think that was all we ever got to.
Thank you so much, Liz. That's been incredibly informative. If anybody is able to join us for our final session, on Monday the 21st, again at 4 o'clock. We're looking at the ugly, which is the ugly narrative from tabloids about prisons, but the way I envisage it is actually the response to that, which is answering that of God in everyone. And we're not having a main speaker. I'm drawing in 3 or 4 people with expertise, like Tim Newell, who was the governor of a therapeutic prison, and somebody else who again will speak about chaplain work. So we'll have the flexibility to maybe continue some of the thoughts that have arisen in this session, because it is absolutely devastating. And with the Ministry of Justice being an unprotected department, that means it will be expected to make cuts. And how somewhere like Wandsworth can cut anything is unimaginable, really. So I have put a notice in the chat to say that the recordings will be on the QICJ website on the front page once they're all gathered together and put on the YouTube channel. So I think those are my notices. So if nobody else has to say anything right now, I think we'd like to just finish as we started, with some quiet.